How would you feel if you know that your tax money isn't being used to build roads or develop infrastructure, but is sitting in an offshore account and will ultimately contribute towards someone's world trip or a yacht? Hi everyone, welcome to the Humane Factor. If you're new here, this is our space to talk about how social issues and policy decisions impact people of the world. Now, I've spoken a lot about governments and international organizations and their role in protecting human rights. But they're not the only institutions that have the responsibility to protect human rights. It's now time we take a look at other actors who have a huge role to play. And they are none other than banks and financial institutions. Now, when we think of banks, we think of investment banking, savings, mortgages, and whatnot. You might be wondering, what do banks have to do with human rights? How can they help? By giving away money to the underprivileged? By giving interest-free loans? No, that's not going to help without economic consequences. I'm here to tell you how banks can help protect our rights and ultimately save the world. Now, when you think of how human rights are affected, what comes to your mind? War, terrorism, human trafficking, organized crime, or drug cartels. But all these crimes are a product of a system that actually enables these activities to be carried out. Now let's take a look at the system. Now just think about it for a moment. How do drug cartels, organized crime networks, and terrorist organizations operate? How do they get the money to finance their operations? How are funds funneled into these activities? Through banks and financial institutions. Banks and financial institutions act as intermediaries that move funds from one place to another. Now you might be wondering, how does this concern you? Well, it does, and let me tell you how. You pay your taxes regularly. How would you feel if you know that your tax money isn't being used to build roads or develop infrastructure, but is sitting in an offshore account and will ultimately contribute towards someone's world trip or a yacht? Are we only going to blame the person who stole public money and used it for their personal gain? What is the bank's responsibility in all this? Now tomorrow, if your friend asks you to loan them $5,000, would you not ask your friend why they want that money? Is it not your responsibility to find out whether that money would be used for an illegal activity, like say, buying drugs? Likewise, if your friend gives you a big bag of cash for safekeeping, would you not want to know where they got that money from and how they got it? Now, what if you come to know that your friend has stolen that money? Would you still store it for them? If you wouldn't do that for your friend, you can understand what role banks and financial institutions have when they store large amounts of money for other people. They have an obligation to find out who their customers are, where they get their money from, whether or not this money is obtained from illegal sources, and is that money proportionate to the person's wealth. For instance, if there is a person who works in an organization with an average fixed salary, they turn up to a bank with $10 million to deposit. This should automatically raise red flags for the bank with regard to where they got that money from. Now, banks and financial institutions can easily be used for money laundering, terrorist financing, and other financial crimes. So they have the responsibility to ensure that they are not complicit in aiding illegal activity. Now, I feel like our approach towards addressing human rights issues has been very reactive so far. We wait for something to happen and then we look at how to solve it. But what's more important is being proactive, taking preventive action and ensuring that such activities don't happen in the first place. Now, as I mentioned before, many organized criminal networks are able to operate only because of the current financial system that makes it easy for them to finance their activities. If we want to nip these illegal activities in the bud, we have to strengthen our compliance and anti-money laundering or AML system to cut off all sources of funding for illegal activities. We have to modify our current system to make it as difficult as possible for criminals to carry out their activities. So, what is money laundering? Money laundering, simply put, is the conversion of dirty money into clean money. It's a process that criminals use to hide the illegal source of their income. For example, income earned through corruption or human trafficking. Now, by passing money through complex transfers or transactions or through a series of businesses, the money is cleaned of its illegitimate origin and made to appear as legitimate. So, money laundering typically occurs in three phases: placement, layering, and integration. Now, in the first stage of placement, the money earned from criminal activity is moved into a bank or financial institution. In the second stage, which is layering, the money is transferred through multiple transactions, forms, or investments to make it absolutely impossible to identify the illegal source of origin. In the third stage, which is integration, the money is freely used without the need to conceal it further. The simplest methods of washing money is by funneling it through cash-intensive businesses. Did you know the term money laundering originated from an infamous gangster, Al Capone, who used a chain of laundromats he owned to launder huge amounts of cash? Let me give you a very simple example of money laundering. Now, let's say there's a criminal organization that earns money from human trafficking. Now, this organization also owns a legitimate business, let's say a restaurant. And this organization asks customers to pay in cash. Now, let's say the organization earns about $1,000 from the legitimate restaurant business and $5,000 from human trafficking. Now, to conceal the origin of $5,000 of illegally earned money through human trafficking, the organization will report its daily restaurant sales to be much higher than what it actually is. In this case, the organization will falsely report that it receives $6,000 from the restaurant and then will deposit all this money in a bank. Then, to avoid being detected or taxed on this amount, the organization will invest this money in other legitimate businesses like real estate. Now, they may use shell companies or holding companies that control other enterprises that this money may be funneled through. The money is then passed through multiple transactions, accounts, and companies and is ultimately transferred to accounts in offshore tax havens where banking transactions are subject to much less scrutiny and regulation. In the final stage of integration, that money is used to buy high-end luxury items, cars, jewelry, a yacht, maybe even an island. So what do banks do to stop this? Now, banks and financial institutions have an obligation to know their customers or do what's called a KYC, which is Know Your Customer. They are responsible for finding out who their clients are and maintaining business relationships only with clients who have a legitimate source of income. So banks are required to do a due diligence on every single customer. Anyone who wants to open a bank account is screened by the bank to make sure that their source of income is clean. Now, it doesn't end there. Banks must also periodically review their existing clients to monitor their activity and ensure that they're not engaging in illegal activities. Now, banks are also required to report suspicious activities and close accounts or terminate relationships with clients who have a nexus to illegal activities. However, several banks and financial institutions have been complicit in money laundering, terrorist financing, and financial fraud. They've been lax in their due diligence and reporting procedures and made it so easy for criminals to deposit large sums of cash. Now, KYC-KR compiled a report of all AML violations and fines in 2020 that were publicly announced by regulatory agencies. They found that in 2020 alone, 28 financial institutions were issued fines for AML-related violations. For instance, an Australian bank, Westpac, was hit with a $900 million fine last year. Westpac failed to report over 19 million cross-border transactions. Some of these payments were linked and made to human trafficking and child exploitation operators based in the Philippines. Deutsche Bank has also been fined several times. Most recently, Deutsche Bank in the UK found itself embroiled in the Jeffrey Epstein scandal and was hit with a $150 million fine. US regulators discovered that the bank processed hundreds of transactions, including payments made to Russian models. Let's take a look at what Deutsche Bank had to say about this.
It was a mistake to onboard Mr. Epstein in 2013. For sure, at that point in time, escalation processes did not work like they should have worked. Since then, since we detected that, Deutsche Bank has done everything to investigate this case, work with the authorities, remediate the issue off-board Mr. Epstein, of course, then. And I think we learned our lesson. But in 2013, the escalation process did not work. And of course, also personal consequences were drawn.
Were executives that looked after his relationship in the prior 5 years, have they left the firm, any of them?
You know, I think we shouldn't go into individuals here and what happened, but I can assure you that personal consequences also on senior management level did happen, of course, because it was a mistake. Again, we did our lessons learned. We investigated. DFS highlighted our cooperation, which we, I think, have done exemplary over the last months. But of course, personal consequences have been drawn.
You mentioned that point.
But you know, these two banks aren't the only ones that have been fined for being complicit in money laundering and financial crimes. Since 2008, regulators have imposed heavy financial penalties on several banks for money laundering and sanctions failures. In the last 10 years, banks have started to invest in their anti-money laundering functions. But despite their efforts, banks continue to remain vulnerable to money laundering, and some of them have collapsed under the weight of their financial crimes failures. Though banks have anti-money laundering systems in place, They are crippled by a variety of inefficiencies that allow criminal activity to remain undetected. Organized criminals constantly probe the weaknesses within these AML systems and actively capitalize on them to turn the profits of their crimes into legitimate assets. Why are banks continuing to fail in this area? What should they be doing differently in order to stop enabling criminal activity from taking place? Stay tuned and watch the next episode to know what banks can do to save the world from corruption and humanitarian crises. As you know, I put out videos every Wednesday and Saturday. Please hit the subscribe button and join me on this wonderful journey towards exploring the world with a touch of humanity. Because we need some humanity. There's never enough of it. Until next time.